When I first heard the sound, it was like a car accident in slow motion, metal scraping against brick, followed by the sharp tinkle of breaking glass. At first, I thought maybe a kid had crashed their bicycle into something or that someone's trash can had rolled into the street and caused a minor mess. But when I stepped outside to investigate, what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't a kid on a bike. It wasn't even a stray animal knocking over garbage cans. Instead, there was Karen standing next to her golf cart. A ridiculous white and pink contraption she probably spent way too much money on. Her vehicle was wedged halfway into my garage door, which now looked like it had been through a war zone. The frame was dented, one of the panels was shattered, and tiny shards of glass sparkled all over my driveway, as if mocking me with how bad things were about to get. Karen didn't look sorry at all. In fact, she looked downright mad. She stood there with her arms crossed, wearing sunglasses that made her seem untouchable, like she was auditioning for some kind of suburban villain movie. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the damage like I** was the one who'd driven her golf cart into my house. What happened? I finally managed to ask, trying hard to keep my voice steady. My heart was racing, but I figured staying calm would help me understand why my property suddenly looked like a disaster area. "This is your fault," Karen said sharply, pointing at the wreckage like I'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing. "My fault?" I asked, blinking in disbelief. "How is this possibly my fault?" "You left your garbage cans out," she replied, gesturing vaguely toward the curb where our trash bins sat neatly lined up. "They were obstructing the road." My mouth dropped open. "The road? Karen, this is a neighborhood street, not a highway. People don't speed through here." She ignored me completely, already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer." That's when reality hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an accident. It was going to turn into a full-blown battle. Karen wasn't planning to apologize or take responsibility for losing control of her golf cart. No, she was blaming me because my garbage cans were sitting exactly where they always did, near the curb, waiting to be picked up by the trash collectors. Apparently, that was enough to justify ramming her cart straight into my garage. As I stood there staring at the chaos, my mind raced. How could this happen? Karen was known around the neighborhood as someone who liked rules more than people, sure, but suing me over a simple mistake, that seemed extreme even for her. What made her think she could shift the blame onto me? And why did she feel entitled to treat other people's property like it didn't matter? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering behind curtains as they watched Karen inspect the damage to her golf cart. Some gave me sympathetic looks, while others avoided making eye contact altogether. I couldn't tell who believed her side of the story and who thought she was being unreasonable. All I knew was that my quiet little corner of Serenity Lane had just become anything but serene. By the time night fell, I still hadn't processed everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug face and the ruined garage door. This wasn't just about fixing a piece of property anymore. It was personal. Whatever happened next, I realized, would define not just my relationship with Karen, but also how everyone else in the neighborhood viewed me. Would they see me as someone who stood up for themselves, or as someone who let Karen walk all over them? For the first time since moving to Serenity Lane, I felt truly uneasy and unsure of what to do next. 2 days after the crash, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. At first glance, it looked official. Thick paper, a formal return address, and that unmistakable air of bad news. My stomach sank as I opened it and pulled out the letter inside. It didn't take long to realize what it was. Karen was suing me. The document accused me of negligence, claiming that my reckless placement of garbage receptacles had caused her to swerve and crash into my garage. Worse still, she was demanding compensation, not just for the damage to her golf cart, but also for repairs to my garage door. Yes, you read that right. She was suing me for damages to my own property. I stared at the words on the page, my hands trembling slightly. How could this be happening? One moment, I'm living my quiet life in Serenity Lane, minding my own business. The next, I'm being dragged into some absurd legal battle over trash cans that weren't even in the road. The sheer audacity of it all left me speechless. When Mark got home from work, I showed him the letter. He skimmed through it, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This has to be a joke," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's seriously blaming you for this." "I wish it were a joke," I replied, pacing back and forth across the kitchen. But apparently, Karen doesn't do jokes. She does lawsuits. Mark set the letter down and sighed heavily. "We need to fight this," he said firmly. "If we let her get away with this, who knows what she'll try next." Easier said than done. Fighting meant lawyers, which meant money, and lots of it. Money we didn't exactly have lying around. Between mortgage payments, Ellie's daycare costs, and everyday expenses, our budget was already stretched thin. The thought of throwing thousands of dollars at a lawsuit made my chest tighten with anxiety. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about principle. Letting Karen win would mean giving in to her bullying tactics, allowing her to twist reality to suit her needs. If I backed down now, what message would that send? To her, to the neighborhood, and to myself. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug face or replayed the sound of her golf cart smashing into my garage. What bothered me most wasn't the physical damage. It was the way she refused to take responsibility. Instead of owning up to her mistake, she'd concocted this ridiculous story about my garbage cans obstructing the road. And now, she expected me to pay for everything. The injustice gnawed at me, keeping me awake until dawn. By the time morning rolled around, I felt exhausted but oddly determined. Maybe I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I wasn't going to roll over without a fight. There had to be another way, a smarter way, to handle this. The next day, I decided to talk to Tom, the retired architect who lived 2 doors down. He'd been my ally during a previous run-in with the HOA, and I knew he'd understand how infuriating this situation was. When I explained what had happened, he listened intently, nodding occasionally as I ranted about Karen's audacity and Carol's passive-aggressive comments. "You can't let her bully you," Tom said firmly when I finished. "If you give in now, she'll walk all over you and everyone else here." "But what am I supposed to do?" I asked, exasperated. "I can't afford a lawyer, and half the neighborhood probably thinks I'm the bad guy anyway." Tom leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "You don't need a lawyer yet," he said slowly. "What you need is proof." "Proof?" I echoed, confused. He nodded. "Karen's story doesn't add up. If she says your garbage cans made her swerve, then there should be evidence of that. Did you check your security camera?" My heart skipped a beat. I'd installed a Ring camera above the garage months ago, mostly to keep an eye on package deliveries. Could it have captured the crash? Thanking Tom, I rushed inside to review the footage. As I watched the video, my stomach churned, not because of guilt, but because of anger. There was Karen, speeding down the street like she owned it, weaving recklessly before plowing straight into my garage without any sign of obstruction. My garbage cans were nowhere near the road. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, or maybe a golf cart. The events of the previous day replayed in my mind over and over again. Karen's smug expression, her ridiculous accusations, and the way she turned what should have been a simple accident into something much bigger. It wasn't just about the garage door anymore. It was about power, control, and Karen's need to always come out on top. As I sipped my coffee and stared out the kitchen window, I noticed something strange. Neighbors who usually waved or stopped to chat were suddenly avoiding me. Mrs. Henderson across the street pretended not to see me when I waved. Even Ellie, our bubbly 5-year-old, mentioned that her best friend Lily hadn't wanted to play after school yesterday. She said her mom told her we're busy. Ellie had reported innocently. completely unaware of the tension brewing around us. It didn't take long for me to figure out why. By noon, whispers about the lawsuit were spreading faster than wildfire through dry grass. Everyone seemed to know about it, even though no one had the guts to talk to me directly. Instead, they exchanged knowing glances or spoke in hushed tones when I passed by. It was like living in some twisted episode of a reality TV show where everyone gossiped about you, but never said anything to your face. Then came Carol, the HOA president. She showed up at my mailbox later that afternoon, dressed in her usual crisp blouse and pearls, looking as if she'd just stepped off the pages of a magazine. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were cold, like she was sizing me up before delivering bad news. "I hope you realize this reflects poorly on the community," she said, her tone clipped and judgmental. "Reflects poorly," I repeated, incredulous. Karen crashed into my asterisk house, Carol. Shouldn't you be talking to her? Carol pursed her lips, clearly annoyed that I wasn't rolling over and playing nice. All I'm saying is, lawsuits aren't good for property values. People don't want to live in a neighborhood where disputes escalate so quickly. Translation: keep quiet, let Karen win, and don't rock the boat. Because heaven forbid anyone disrupt the perfect illusion of Serenity Lane, even if it meant letting a bully get away with destroying someone else's property. After Carol left, I sat on the porch steps, staring at the cracked driveway and trying to process everything. Was I really supposed to just sit back and let Karen steamroll me? Did everyone expect me to apologize for having garbage cans near the curb, a perfectly normal thing to do, and pay for damages caused by her reckless driving? It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into an alternate universe where logic didn't exist. That evening, I decided to call Tom, the retired architect who lived 2 doors down. He'd been my ally during a previous battle with the HOA, and I knew he'd understand how frustrating this situation was. When I explained what had happened, he listened patiently, nodding as I vented about Karen's audacity and Carol's thinly veiled threats. "You can't let her intimidate you," Tom said firmly once I finished. "If you give in now, she'll walk all over you and everyone else here." "But what am I supposed to do?" I asked, exasperated. "I don't have the money to hire a lawyer, and half the neighborhood probably thinks I'm the bad guy anyway." Tom leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "You don't need a lawyer yet," he said slowly. "What you need is proof." "Proof?" I echoed, confused. He nodded. "Karen's story doesn't add up. If she says your garbage cans made her swerve, then there should be evidence of that. Did you check your security camera?" My heart skipped a beat. I'd installed a Ring camera above the garage months ago, mostly to keep an eye on package deliveries. Could it have captured the crash? I thanked Tom and rushed inside to check the footage. As I watched the video, my stomach churned, not because of guilt, but because of anger. There was Karen, speeding down the street like she owned it, weaving recklessly before plowing straight into my garage without any sign of obstruction. My garbage cans were nowhere near the road. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. The security footage was like a lifeline I didn't know I needed. Watching it felt surreal, almost like I was seeing the events of that chaotic day unfold from someone else's perspective. There was Karen, zooming down the street in her flashy golf cart, leaning into turns like she was auditioning for some kind of suburban NASCAR race. The video clearly showed there was nothing blocking her path. No garbage cans, no stray animals, nothing. She wasn't swerving or braking suddenly either. It looked less like an accident and more like, well, carelessness. But the footage alone wasn't enough to fight back against Karen. If I wanted to stand my ground, I needed more than just proof of what happened. I needed allies, or at least people willing to speak up about Karen's behavior. Over the next few days, Tom and I quietly reached out to neighbors who might have witnessed her reckless driving before the crash. To my surprise, several people had stories they'd been too afraid to share publicly. Take Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. the elderly couple who lived 3 houses down. They told me they'd complained to the HOA months ago after Karen nearly ran over their dog during one of her joyrides. She came barreling down the sidewalk, Mrs. Peterson recalled, shaking her head. We were lucky Spot moved fast enough. The HOA had brushed off their concerns, saying it was a misunderstanding. Clearly, Karen had gotten away with things like this before, and probably counted on doing so again. Then there was Jake, the teenager who mowed lawns in the neighborhood. He admitted he'd seen Karen speeding through the streets multiple times, often while chatting on her phone. I always thought she was going to hit somebody, he said sheepishly. Guess I was right. Armed with the footage and these first-hand accounts, I started piecing together a strategy. Tom helped me draft a formal response to Karen's lawsuit, complete with timestamps from the video and sworn statements from the neighbors who'd spoken out. We also included photos of the damage to my garage door and the surrounding area, showing how absurd her claim about the garbage cans really was. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just about proving my innocence. It was about exposing Karen for what she truly was, someone who thought rules only applied to everyone else. As we worked on the response, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was angry, not just at Karen, but at the way she manipulated people and situations to suit her needs. On the other hand, I felt empowered. For once, I wasn't sitting back and letting her dictate the narrative. I was taking control, fighting back with facts instead of fear. When the package containing our response was finally ready to send, I hesitated for a moment. What if this made things worse? What if Karen retaliated even harder? But then I reminded myself of something Tom had said earlier. Sometimes standing up doesn't mean winning. It means refusing to lose. With that thought in mind, I mailed copies of the response to both Karen's lawyer and the HOA board. I included a strongly worded letter accusing Karen of reckless behavior and demanding she cover the cost of repairing my garage. It felt good to put everything in writing, to lay out the truth in black and white where no one could ignore it. By the time I returned home, I noticed Karen peeking out of her window, watching me with narrowed eyes. I gave her a small wave, not because I wanted to be friendly, but because I knew she'd see it as a challenge. Let her stew on that, I thought. Let her wonder what I was planning next. That night, as I sat on the couch flipping through TV channels, I felt a strange sense of calm. The ball was in Karen's court now. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done everything I could to protect myself, and maybe even inspire others to stand up to her too. The response I'd sent off felt like dropping a bomb into calm waters. I knew Karen wouldn't take it lying down, but I wasn't prepared for just how quickly, or dramatically, she'd react. The very next morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, there was a loud knock on the door. When I opened it, Karen was standing on my porch, her face flushed red with fury. She looked like she'd been waiting all night to confront me. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped, jabbing a finger in my direction. Her voice carried so much venom that Mark, who was in the kitchen, immediately came out to see what was going on. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. Inside, though, my heart was pounding. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. "Oh, don't play dumb," Karen spat. "Sending that asterisk letter asterisk to my lawyer. You really think you can intimidate me?" "Intimidate you?" I shot back, finally losing my patience. "Karen, you crashed your golf cart into my garage and then sued me because of garbage cans that weren't even in your way. I'm just showing people the truth." For a split second, she looked rattled, like she hadn't expected me to stand my ground so firmly. But then her mask of superiority slid back into place. "This isn't over," she hissed, turning sharply on her heel and marching back to her house. She slammed her front door so hard I could practically feel the vibration from across the street. Later that evening, I got a call from Karen's lawyer. He sounded annoyed, almost flustered, which was satisfying in its own way. Apparently, they'd reviewed the evidence I'd sent, the security footage, the witness statements, the photos, and realized their case wasn't as strong as they'd hoped. They were dropping the lawsuit, but only if I agreed not to pursue any legal action against Karen for damaging my property. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to push back, to make her pay for the stress and mess she'd caused. But another part of me knew this was the smarter move. Dragging things out would only lead to more headaches, more gossip, and more drama. And honestly, I didn't want to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing me obsessed with revenge. So, after consulting with Tom and Mark, I reluctantly accepted their terms. That same night, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. Word spread fast that Karen had backed down, and suddenly, people who had avoided me started reaching out. Mrs. Henderson brought over a plate of cookies, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. Even Carol, the HOA president, stopped by to say she was glad things had resolved peacefully. It was infuriating, in a way, like everyone had been waiting to see which side would win before deciding where to stand. But I tried to focus on the positives. At least now, people seemed less afraid of Karen. Still, the experience left me drained. Standing up to someone like her wasn't easy, especially when it felt like the entire neighborhood was watching and judging. For every supportive comment I received, there was an undercurrent of unease, a reminder that living here meant constantly navigating delicate relationships and unspoken rules. As I sat on the porch later that night, staring at the stars, I thought about how far I'd come since moving to Serenity Lane. I'd gone from being someone who quietly followed the rules to someone willing to challenge them, even if it meant facing backlash. It wasn't always fun, and it certainly wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Because sometimes, doing the right thing means stepping outside your comfort zone and hoping others will follow your lead. The days following Karen's retreat were strange. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath, waiting to see how the drama would unfold. And now that it was over, everyone wanted to talk about it. At first, I felt like I was living in some kind of fishbowl. Neighbors who had previously avoided me suddenly appeared at my door with casseroles, baked goods, or just excuses to chat. Some came bearing apologies for not speaking up sooner. Others simply wanted to share their own horror stories about Karen. I always knew she was trouble. One neighbor confessed during a casual sidewalk conversation. But no one wants to be the first to say anything, you know. I nodded, though inside I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration because so many people had let Karen get away with her behavior for years, because they were too scared or too polite to confront her. Relief because maybe, just maybe, this incident would change things. Maybe seeing someone stand up to her would give others the courage to do the same. Karen herself became noticeably quieter after the lawsuit fiasco. Gone were the smug smiles and holier-than-thou attitude that used to make her the unofficial queen of Serenity Lane. Now she mostly kept to herself, avoiding eye contact whenever we crossed paths. When she did venture outside, it was usually to tend to her garden or take her golf cart out for short, cautious drives around the block. She didn't speed anymore, and she certainly didn't come near my house. It wasn't just Karen who changed, though. The whole neighborhood seemed different, lighter, almost. Conversations flowed more freely, without the usual undercurrent of tension. People joked about how the HOA Karen had finally met her match, and while the laughter was lighthearted, there was also a sense of vindication in it. For once, it felt like the scales had tipped slightly in favor of fairness instead of fear. Even Carol, the ever-proper HOA president, seemed less intimidating. During the next monthly meeting, she announced plans to review the association's policies on dispute resolution, citing recent events as a reminder of the importance of clear communication and mutual respect. While she didn't mention Karen by name, everyone knew exactly who she was referring to. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, including Carol herself, judging by the faint blush that crept into her cheeks when someone asked pointedly, "Are we talking about what happened last month?" Still, as much as I appreciated the newfound camaraderie among neighbors, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Living in a tight-knit community should have meant support and shared responsibility. But instead, it often felt like walking on eggshells. Too many people prioritized keeping the peace over standing up for what was right, and that mindset allowed bullies like Karen to thrive. Something needed to change, not just for me, but for everyone who called Serenity Lane home. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching Ellie play in the yard, I voiced my thoughts aloud. What if we tried to create something better? I suggested. Something that actually helps people resolve conflicts before they escalate. Mark raised an eyebrow. Like what? A mediation program, I said, warming to the idea. We could bring in neutral third parties to help neighbors work through disagreements instead of letting them fester or turn into lawsuits. Mark smiled. That's not a bad idea. You should pitch it to the HOA. I hesitated. After everything that had happened, the thought of going back to another HOA meeting made my stomach churn. But deep down, I knew he was right. If I wanted real change, I had to be willing to push for it, even if it meant stepping into uncomfortable territory again. So I started drafting a proposal, outlining how the program could work and why it mattered. Tom offered to help, lending his experience as a retired architect to organize the details. Together, we created something solid, a plan that focused on collaboration rather than confrontation. And while I wasn't sure how the HOA board would react, I reminded myself of one thing. Sometimes progress starts with taking a stand, even when it feels risky. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. Walking into the community center, I couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was compared to previous meetings. People greeted me warmly instead of avoiding eye contact, and several neighbors gave me encouraging nods when they saw me carrying my proposal folder. It was clear that the lawsuit ordeal had shifted something, not just in how people viewed Karen, but in how they saw me too. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stood up, clutching my notes tightly. I'd like to propose a new initiative, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. A neighborhood mediation program designed to help resolve conflicts peacefully before they escalate into lawsuits, or worse. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Carol leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Go on," she said, gesturing for me to continue. I explained how the program would work. Trained mediators, volunteers from within the community, would step in when disputes arose, helping both sides find common ground without resorting to lawyers or threats. The goal wasn't to take power away from the HOA, but to give neighbors a better way to handle disagreements themselves. I emphasized that this wasn't about pointing fingers or dwelling on past mistakes. It was about creating a stronger, more supportive community. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Neighbors nodded along as I spoke, some even chiming in with ideas of their own. One woman suggested hosting workshops to teach conflict resolution skills. Another proposed setting aside funds to train volunteer mediators. Even Carol, who usually resisted change, seemed intrigued. "This is actually a good idea," she admitted after a long pause, though she quickly added, "though I think we can refine it further." Of course, she couldn't resist taking partial credit, claiming the concept aligned with her vision for a harmonious neighborhood. Whatever. If it meant getting the program off the ground, I was happy to let her have her moment. The motion passed unanimously, and just like that, Serenity Lane had its first official step toward real change. As people filed out of the meeting, several stopped to thank me, not just for the proposal, but for standing up to Karen and showing everyone that it was possible to challenge unfairness without tearing the neighborhood apart. Karen, meanwhile, stayed quiet throughout the meeting. She sat stiffly in the back row, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When the meeting ended, she slipped out quickly, disappearing into her house without a word. For once, she didn't try to dominate the conversation or insert herself into the spotlight. It was almost poetic justice. In the weeks that followed, life on Serenity Lane began to feel lighter. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood for so long started to lift, replaced by a sense of hope. Conversations flowed more freely. Laughter echoed through the streets again, and people seemed genuinely invested in making things better, not just for themselves, but for everyone. As for me, I realized something important. Standing up to Karen hadn't just been about protecting my garage or saving myself from a ridiculous lawsuit. It had been about proving that one person's actions could ripple outward, inspiring others to demand fairness and kindness in their own lives. Sure, living in a community meant dealing with imperfections and occasional drama, but it also meant having the power to shape the world around you. Months later, as I watched Ellie chase fireflies in our front yard, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For my family, for my neighbors, and for the courage it took to fight for what was right. Life on Serenity Lane wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was ours. And sometimes, that was enough.